Jessee, a well-liked father, grandfather, brother, and friend. Then someone close to him decided that Jack should die sooner rather than later. Our moment in crime is the murder of Jessee. As is the procedure when someone dies unnaturally, an autopsy was conducted on the body of 56-year-old Jessee. Jack had been found dead on the 13th of August, 1998, his body covered in stab wounds. Jack's daughter, Cheryl Deander, had found her father's body on the living room floor of his home at 419 Choctaw Place, Placentia, California, that summer's evening. Jack was home alone when he was attacked by his killer, and he was not able to put up much of a fight. He was still weak from 2 surgeries he had undergone recently. This resulted in Jack being stabbed 11 times all over his body with a double-edged knife. His killer left a trail of blood leading to the bathroom sink, where he cleaned up before signalling his getaway driver with a walkie-talkie. Jack's murder was certainly no burglary gone wrong. He had been killed as part of a murder-for-hire plot. Family meant everything to Jack, a mechanical engineering manager at Fujitsu Electronics. He hosted family gatherings by his outdoor pool, had 2 daughters, and doted on his grandchildren. He enjoyed his food, never saying no to a glass of Chardonnay with dinner and eating homemade lunches. He would go on trips to Las Vegas to play blackjack, and spent his free time during the day going on long walks. Classic cars were always of an interest to Jack. He did not like guns and was the kind of person who did not lock his doors. He supported the Raiders and the Dodgers, and it was his love of sports that he shared with his brother, David. In fact, when David first heard about Jack's murder, he immediately recalled a conversation he'd had with Jack while bowling one night. Jack said that if anything ever happened to him, his wife, Sandra, would be the one responsible. Jack had met Sandra at work in the early 1980s, and by 1984, the 2 of them had married. Sandra, who had 2 children herself, had now married for the 3rd time. In 1998, Sandra was 47 years old, and when Jack fell ill, she was not keen on the idea of helping her husband when he needed it the most. After Jack had undergone surgery, a nurse attempted to show Sandra how to help her husband use a colostomy bag. Sandra's reaction shocked the nurse so much that she recorded the moment in a hospital report. Sandra had covered her ears, ran to a corner of the hospital room, and said that she would not help Jack. Sandra was so repulsed by the idea of caring for her sick husband that she decided he had to die. It also helped that Jack had $262,582 tucked away in a 401k account and a life insurance policy worth $411,858. Determined not to get her hands dirty, Sandra came up with a plan that would result in the death of her husband. "My mother wants Jack killed." Those were the words spoken by Sandra's son, Thomas Ehlert, to his friend and target co-worker, Brett Schrauben, the first time he mentioned the murder-for-hire plot concocted by his mother. When he was told that Sandra was willing to pay $50,000 for the murder, Schrauben agreed to meet with her in a parking lot of a Placentia mall on the 24th of June, 1998, but only if she gave him a non-refundable payment of $5,000. Sandra also gave him a photo of Jack and a plan of the interior of their house sketched on paper. It was also at the meeting that Schrauben learned the details of the murder plan. The killing had to look like a burglary gone wrong, and Sandra would give the signal for the murder to go ahead when she called him, saying she was going to run errands. A knife had to be used as it was not as noticeable as a gun. Later, he would receive a call from MacLeod, who would be acting like a grieving stepson, just in case anyone was listening. Enticed by the prospect of receiving another $45,000, Schrauben agreed to be the hitman. As Schrauben and MacLeod both lived in Arizona, they agreed to meet up in Phoenix on 3 separate occasions so that Schrauben could receive the rest of his payment. But this is where Schrauben's story gets a little blurry, as the rest of his story includes a man who is only allegedly involved in the crime. Schrauben said that upon having second thoughts about committing the murder, his friend, Thomas Garrick, offered to carry out the crime instead. Schrauben claimed that Garrick was originally the getaway driver and that the two of them switched roles. Schrauben kept $30,000 of the murder money and gave the rest to Garrick. In order to make the murder look like a burglary gone wrong, Garrick was supposed to steal a valuable coin collection belonging to Jack, and Schrauben said that Garrick forgot to do this. Garrick, however, has denied involvement in the murder and was later acquitted at trial. As the killer made his escape from 419 Choctaw Place, a police car with flashing red lights drove past the getaway car. Luck was on the side of the co-conspirators that night. The officer inside the vehicle did not notice a man wearing blood-stained shorts, a long-sleeved shirt, and Vans sneakers climbing into a Toyota Tercel, which then drove east onto the Imperial Highway and then south on the 55 and 5 freeways. In a police interview that started at 4 a.m, Sandra Jessee said that she last saw her husband alive when she watched Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy with him earlier in the evening. Then she headed out to a strip mall to deposit a check and buy Jack a strawberry milkshake, fries, and 5-piece chicken nuggets at Burger King. She then drove to Walmart, where she bought Jack a new pair of shorts and ice for his fever. Sandra reported to police that she told Jack she would only be gone for an hour. The last thing he said to her was to ask for sweet and sour sauce for his chicken nuggets. Jack began to panic after his wife failed to return after an hour. He contacted his daughter Cheryl, who lived close by. She visited her father around 9:30 p.m. that night and agreed to go and look for Sandra. Cheryl spent a quarter of an hour driving around looking for her stepmother before returning to her father's home, where she found him in a pool of blood. In the 15 minutes that Cheryl had been gone, someone had killed Jack Jessee. Sandra returned to the house at 9:50 p.m, not long after paramedics arrived at the scene. She claimed that she had only been gone for 5 minutes. But investigators suspected that Sandra was involved in her husband's death from the start. During the police interview, Detective Darren Wyatt, who was secretly filming Sandra, noticed that she was attempting to control the interview by stalling on her answers to his questions. He took note when she began complaining about Jack, calling him an invalid, needy, and clingy. She said that she had no idea who would kill Jack and thought that it would not be his daughter Cheryl or Russ, a co-worker of Jack's. Investigators soon learned that Sandra's alibi was not solid. In her interview, she stated that she had only been gone for 45 minutes to an hour. But the store receipts found in her SUV proved otherwise. All of the stores she went to that evening were less than a 2-minute drive from the home she shared with Jack. But the timestamps on the store receipts showed that she had been gone for nearly 2 hours, including a 63-minute gap that could not be accounted for. The chicken nuggets she'd bought were cold, and the ice she'd purchased was melting by the time she returned home. Then Sandra began refusing to cooperate with the investigation. She refused to give fingerprint samples and ignored phone calls from Detective Wyatt. When investigators returned to the crime scene the next day to search for more clues, they were forced to obtain a search warrant when MacLeod refused to let them on to the property. While the police were able to gather some evidence against the three co-conspirators, they did not have enough to charge them with murder, and the case began to go cold. This allowed Sandra to pocket all of her husband's money, receiving more than $777,000. She sold the Placentia home she once shared with Jack and moved to Arizona to be closer to MacLeod. The three conspirators thought they had gotten away with murder. Years later, the case file landed on the desks of Tom Dove and Brian Sutton of the Orange County Sheriff's Department. David Jessee had never stopped pushing the police to investigate his brother's murder. He was angry at the lack of progress the Placentia police were making in the case, and he succeeded in having the case transferred to the Sheriff's Department. Dove and Sutton found a potential lead in the case. A 3-year-old report was found in the case file that detailed a phone call from an anonymous caller. The caller reported that Sandra and her son had hired a hitman who worked with MacLeod at Target. The hitman had used the payment for the murder to buy a new truck and jet skis. The caller also said that the hitman switched roles after getting cold feet, and instead drove the getaway car for another man who had carried out the murder. Schrauben became a person of interest when Dove recognised his name on a piece of paper found in Sandra's purse the night the murder took place. Mike Kalovic eventually came forward as the anonymous caller. When Jack was murdered, Kalovic was the boyfriend of the sister of Schrauben's then girlfriend. He had overheard Schrauben discussing the murder in a sports bar. Using out-of-state surveillance and wiretaps, the Sheriff's Department came up with a plan to catch the three co-conspirators. A series of voicemails were left for Schrauben's friends, who lived in Orange County, by the Sheriff's Department in 2005. As investigators had hoped, those friends contacted Schrauben to let him know that a detective was looking for him. This led to a phone call between Schrauben and MacLeod, which investigators were able to listen in on. MacLeod told his friend to relax, and when he asked if Schrauben felt comfortable talking on the phone, Schrauben said no. This came as no surprise to investigators. They knew that Sandra and her co-conspirators left themselves notes, reminding themselves not to use cell phones and to be careful during phone calls, as someone might be listening. Surveillance teams then spent 5 days observing MacLeod using payphones and holding meetings with Schrauben outside of a Target, inside 2 gun stores, at a fast food restaurant, and at a birthday party. A phone call between mother and son was also recorded. MacLeod told his mother that he did not want to speak on the phone, and, despite living within a couple of 100 feet of each other, they both drove to a strip mall in separate cars, got out, and had a conversation in the parking lot. Schrauben was arrested first. Police had him listen to a recording of what police believed was a staged phone conversation between Sandra and her son. In the call, both mother and son wondered if Schrauben had killed Jack. But Schrauben did not break down easily. It took over 500 days of pre-trial jail time and a visit from Jack's other daughter, Cher, before he finally confessed. Sandra and her son were finally arrested in 2007. They were brought back to Orange County to stand trial. Schrauben decided to make a deal with the prosecution. Pleading guilty to one count of voluntary manslaughter and testifying against Sandra resulted in him only serving 515 days behind bars. The prosecution said that Schrauben was also released because there was not enough evidence to keep him in jail. But at their 2009 trial, the prosecution was just one vote away from convicting Sandra and her son. The jury had deadlocked 11-1 when deciding if the pair should be convicted. Prosecutor Mike Murray did not give up in his quest to get Jack and his family justice. A retrial was scheduled, but rather than pleading innocent again like he had at his first trial, Ehlert decided to follow in Schrauben's footsteps and make a deal with the prosecution. He agreed to testify against his mother and to plead guilty to second-degree murder, which he did in 2011. In exchange, Schrauben received a 15-year to life sentence. Sandra, on the other hand, continued to proclaim her innocence. Her retrial took place in 2011, and Derek Bircher acted as her public defender. Bircher said that Sandra was a doting wife to Jack, and that Schrauben and Ehlert were sacrificing her so that they could guarantee their freedom. Ehlert testified that his mother had approached both himself and Schrauben about the murder-for-hire plot. Sandra deliberately avoided answering the questions asked by Mike Murray, and she had to be ordered by the judge, James A. Stotler, to answer them. Sandra eventually said that she died the day her husband was killed, and that her spending sprees she went on after Jack's death were not signs of happiness, but a way to make herself feel closer to her husband. But the evidence against her added up, and, after 4 hours, the jury found Sandra guilty of one felony count of special circumstances murder for financial gain, and one count of conspiracy. Sandra was given her sentence of life without the possibility of parole, plus 25 years, the following year. Jack's family had to wait for years in order to get justice for the man they describe as tender and trusting. They knew that their much-loved relative did not have long left in the world, but they did not expect him to die in such a violent manner. In 1998, Jack was diagnosed with colon cancer. The cancer was the reason for the surgeries he'd had just before his murder. And, if Sandra had waited just a couple of months, she would have legally gotten her hands on Jack's money, and she would not be behind bars. Jack's autopsy revealed his cancer was at such an advanced stage that he only had 6 weeks left to live.